All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Stukent Expert Session. My name is Trevor Erickson, and I will be running the presentation today. And we have an awesome guest by the name of Shane Snow. We're excited to have him present to all of us today. Shane is the co-founder of Contently, and we're going to have him dive into that for a brief moment in just a second. But Shane is a tech journalist, and you can find his work in places like Fast Company, The New Yorker, Wired, Washington Post, among a lot of other places. Recently, as of, I believe, Shane, a couple weeks ago, you just published a new book called Smartcuts?
Yep, 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. I'm about a third of the way through that book. I'm going to recommend it. I'm sure Shane's going to have some good things to say about it at the end.
Thank you.
I love it when a book can share experiences and stories to get the message and points across. And so far, through a third of the book, that's what it's been like. So I love learning that way. With regards to that book, you're going to want to make sure that you stay tuned to throughout the entire presentation today, because Shane's actually allowed us to do a book giveaway. So at the end of this presentation, when you guys get done listening to it, there'll be a comment section on Shane's page on Stukent.com. And what you'll want to do is just write a couple sentences of what you learned and how you're going to apply it, whether it's in school, life, business, going forward. And at the end of this semester, so this is 2014, in case you're listening to this at a future date, sometime in December, we'll let you know. We will do the book giveaway, and we'll ship you out a book to the winner. So anyways, without further ado, Shane, before you get going, if you could just kind of give us a rundown of kind of what your role is and what you do and what Contently does, and then we can roll right into your presentation.
Sure. So my role at Contently is I was one of three founders. There was a business guy, a tech guy, and I was the creative guy. So as we've grown the company, we're about 65 people at this point. I'm over everything that's brand, design, content, and creative. So, and that comes from my background in marketing and journalism. So day to day, I'm part of the leadership team and making sure that my people have resources to do what they're doing. But from the beginning, I was kind of doing all of the things by hand until I could hire people to do them for me, and increasingly sort of wear fewer hats. So that's my job, and I also am a journalist, which is why I started the company. So I do a lot of writing on the side, and that keeps me sharp, hopefully.
Awesome. Let's dive right in. I'm just running down the checklist to make sure we've covered everything before you get going, and I think we're good to go.
All right, so I'm going to talk today about content marketing. And this is the agenda. Why content marketing, then a little bit about Contently, not as a sales pitch, but just to understand how we came across the industry, and then what I call the content flywheel. So basically, what's the framework for being smart about approaching content marketing? So the first thing is that content marketing is this term that has just exploded over the last few years. When you look at Google search volume, at the same time that searches for banner ads and search engine optimization were declining over the last several years, content marketing was this term that just everyone was talking about. And this chart is from 2012, but it's even gotten bigger. So it's this industry that has exploded, and there's a ton of money being poured into it, and it has all sorts of nicknames, I guess, or euphemisms. Native advertising, branded content, sometimes brand journalism, which term I dislike because most of the time content marketing is being done by companies that are not journalists, but in a journalistic way, and I'll explain more about that. So the reason for content marketing becoming this big thing is because of three converging trends. The rise of social media, where literally anyone can be a publisher. You know, the internet created this means for anyone to start blogging and to publish, but it was there were barriers to entry. With social media, all you need is 140 characters and you're a publisher. So the rise of social, suddenly you saw a lot of businesses deciding that they wanted to be their own publishers rather than paying someone else to put their message next to the content that they wanted. So for example, Tiffany's has had the advertisement in the second page of the New York Times for decades. They pay to have their message next to the thing that everyone actually wants to read. But with the rise of social media, now Tiffany's can put their own message out there into the world. There's also new technologies that have come about that have made publishing easier, not just short form social media stuff, but longer form and getting the content out there. And then there's also what we're seeing is a decline in emphasis of on-page SEO. Basically, for a period, lots of companies were tricking Google. When most people found the content that they were looking for on the internet through Google, people figured out ways to trick Google. Either it was kind of by the rules or it was against the rules, and in either case, the game was figuring out what Google want, not figuring out what people want. Well, Google has, and other search engines have wised up to this, and now they take what the things that they serve up in their search results are based on what people want increasingly, and they get those cues from what people share. But more and more, with the rise of social, all of us are getting our news. Our newspaper in the morning is often our Twitter feed or our Facebook news feed. And so, the update from your crazy uncle sits next to the update from the New York Times, sits next to the update from Coca-Cola. And that means that Google is not the king of content discovery, especially for sort of news-related content, which is really interesting. So all these trends kind of converged over the last few years that gave rise to publishing on one's own accord to becoming this thing that brands are very interested in. So that's why you see companies like American Express publishing one of the largest online magazines for small business owners. This is a way for them to get small business owners to understand that they care about small business. And what's interesting is in years past, you saw with, say, advertorial, you're reading through a magazine and you go to a page that says this is an advertiser story. Usually those are very salesy, like here's why you should buy this watch sort of thing. What you're seeing with content marketing on the web these days is there's very little of that and a lot more of here's what we care about. If you care about that too, come join us. So in American Express's example, they're literally just talking about the plight of small business owners, and they never talk about credit cards, knowing that you'll build a relationship with them and one day think of American Express when you're in the market for a credit card. And they have this particular site, they get millions of visitors. So it's a real legitimate publication that's driving legitimate business for them. You have more consumer examples, Coca-Cola journey. So Coca-Cola's corporate webpage used to be, here's a list of our headquarters and here's our board of directors, and now their corporate homepage is telling stories about what's going on behind the scenes at Coca-Cola. So it's for, you go to the corporate page if you're an investor or you're interested in the company itself, and so they're writing the stories that they wish that the news would write. In this case, how these three guys helped bring back the brand surge and kind of the behind the scenes story there. You see companies like Whole Foods create really interesting digital experiences in text and in video and photo around topics that they care about. So Whole Foods cares about sustainability and family and community, and so they seek out stories about that, and they actually have nothing to do with what Whole Foods sells. They're not showing you the onion that they're chopping and saying how much it costs. It's literally to build relationships with people around the topics that Whole Foods cares about. It's a branding play. And then you have examples that are fiction, where the Lego movie recently banked something like $200 million. People paid $200 million to essentially watch a big advertisement. But the difference was that this advertisement was so cool and so interesting, and the story was so good and it was so high quality that people paid to watch it. We all know that Lego is going to sell lots of Legos because of this, and we're all building a relationship with Lego when we watch this movie. But that's an example of great content marketing. And then you see smaller companies. So this is a screenshot of our blog. you see businesses, both startups, middle market companies, B2B, B2C, starting to use news basically as a way to build relationships with customers. So we're in the business of content marketing, and so we run a publication where we actually cover the news of content marketing. In this case, this is news about Goldman Sachs doing a deal with the New York Times, and we do education, we do how-to, and then we break stories. And this is how we build subscribers and eventually get people to become interested in our products. You see this happening across the board. Millions of people are starting to do content marketing, starting to sell content marketing. And the reason is because the data suggests that it is more powerful than many, many other forms of marketing and advertising. 90% of consumers find it useful. Some huge percentage of chief marketing officers of major companies are dumping a lot of their other budgets into content marketing. You're seeing that content really feeds everything, every other kind of marketing that has been going on the internet, from email marketing to social media marketing, to retention marketing, even direct mail. Content is actually what you're sending out, and so people are doing this, and they're finding that engaging people with content actually costs less than engaging people with advertisements, which has led to this, that what people want is not advertisements. What they want are stories. And this is something that's part of the fabric of our life. I guess since the beginning of civilization, stories were the thing that brought us together and built relationships. Back in the day when we were living in tribes, and you go out and you go hunting, you come back and you sit around the campfire and you tell the stories of how the saber-toothed tiger was dangerous and how the berries that taste bad are bad and all of your adventures. And that's how we distilled this wide world of stimuli and information into a way that could be packaged so that the rest of our tribe could learn from that very quickly and effectively. So we adapted at the same time that the human brain evolved for logic and speech. It also took on this capacity for storytelling, and that's because it was a survival mechanism. Stories build relationships, and they bring people together, and they help us remember, and they make us care. So this is what I guess businesses have been trying to do since the history of business, is build relationships with customers and make them care. And it turns out that one of the best ways to do that is to tell stories. So historically, over the last, say, 100 years of the marketing and advertising industry, we've basically been putting messages in front of people's faces between them and the thing they want. So, you're watching TV and then suddenly there's a break and it's a commercial, and you're not there for the commercials. In some cases you are. In some cases the commercials are great. But in most cases we invented TiVo for a reason. You want to get back to the story. You want to get back to the content. Or on the internet we stuff banner ads or pop-ups or takeovers, and people click out of them because they want the story. And so the idea with content marketing is to be the thing that someone would log onto the internet for in the first place, rather than be the interruption. And so we say to tell stories, not to create content, because content can be anything. Content is not necessarily a story. On the left here on this slide, I have a classic example of content farm. For many, many years during this time when people were playing the Google search game in kind of a nefarious way, you saw companies figure out what people were searching for, create really crappy content around that topic so that Google would rank them high, and then make money on advertisements when people would click on something just because the thing that they found on that page was not what they wanted. And even if the content is useful, if it's not a story, it won't stick as well in the memory. And so stories are basically a higher means to capture attention and to keep attention. We've also done a lot of research on the power of original stories versus taking other stories. So one of the trends that's happened since the rise of social media is repurposing other people's content, or taking other people's stuff and sharing it out as a means to build your brand. What we found is that for companies that are trying to build relationships using content, that original content, stories that you're creating, or stories that are about you or about your values, are much more powerful than taking stories from somewhere else, like say a New York Times story and putting it on your website. people think it looks much better when you're creating your own content. And then part of the reason for stories over content in general, and not just clicks, is that the average attention span of an internet user is very low. We click on things and then we click out right away. This is actually a very specific slide from my team's sales deck. But we do research on we track when companies are doing content marketing the right way, and when they're using good talent and they're engaging audiences in the right way, that you can increase the amount of time people spend with you in every session. So what the goal is with content marketing is building relationships, not just getting quick wins. And so the measurement that you tend to focus on is that amount of attention, amount of time spent, rather than amount of clicks. Whoops. So there's a lot of things that people say when they talk about why they would do content marketing, and these are some of the ones that we hear all the time in the industry. People say, I want to do content marketing for thought leadership. I want to be well known for something. I want to get word of mouth attention to my brand. I want to engage people. I want to raise awareness. I want to shift their perceptions of what they think of my brand. I want to grow. I want branding itself. All of these things are bundled into what you get from content marketing, and they're different goals. But it's very much in, for most people, two camps. It's either in the branding camp, so it's an alternative to a billboard. You drive down the highway and you see a Coca-Cola billboard. They just want you to remember Coke and remember open happiness, or whatever the current tagline is, so that when you're at the movie theater, you buy Coke and not something else. That's part of the branding and the engagement, the awareness, the word of mouth. You want to tell stories so that people think about you and think about you the way you want them to think about you and tell their friends. The other camp is conversion based. So you tell stories so that you can build relationships with people so they eventually buy something on your website. This is very effective for B2B websites or e-commerce websites. The classic example I love is the Groupon. Groupon grew incredibly quickly because people were opening their email. So they had the daily email that they'd send with a coupon, but in that email was a story, usually a fictitious story written by a comedy writer about the product. So even if I wasn't interested in the laser hair removal coupon that I see in the subject line, I was going to click on it anyway because I was really interested in how are they going to spin it this time? What's the story they're going to have? And they use content to generate these huge open rates, to generate a huge amount of engagement and attention, which then got them a lot of repeat business from customers and helped them grow that business very quickly. So the problem with all of this is that good storytelling is hard. People go to school to become storytellers. They go to grad school to become journalists and and creative writers and videographers, and it's not easy if you're in the business of making fizzy sugar water to reorient your business around telling stories. And it's not easy even if you're in the business of selling advertisements to reorient your ad agency around telling stories. Stories at the end of the day is what you're trying to do. You're trying to tell a brand story when you do an advertisement, but telling the kinds of stories that are longer form, that are more like you'd see on television or more like you'd read in a magazine is tough business. And besides just the creative aspect, with brands, there are all these other hurdles that make it really hard. You have to do all of the logistics and get through the bureaucracy to get the talent on board in the first place. A lot of times as a brand, you don't have a staff of 50 writers and editors and video people. You hire them out as contractors or as freelancers, and that becomes an HR burden. You have to get sign-offs from within your organization. If you're a big brand, your legal department wants to know what you're publishing so that you're not in danger of being sued. And your comms team wants to know what you're publishing so you're not in danger of going off-brand or messaging something that you shouldn't. You need accountability. You need for the management and the leadership of your company to know what's going on and to know if things go wrong, where they went wrong. And then, of course, as a marketer, you're using all of these other tools. You have content management system, whether it's WordPress or Tumblr or Adobe CQ. You have all of your social media channels. You might be using marketing automation software. You have all of your back-end fulfillment and logistics and any other kinds of tools and technologies that you have. You have Salesforce that if you're publishing and creating content, a lot of times you're going to be feeding those different departments, and you need to be able to do that effectively, which creates a logistical challenge. And then, of course, without strategy and without success metrics, there's no point to doing this at all. You will spend a lot of money and not know if it was worth it or not. So there's a lot that needs to be in place to be successful as a brand publisher or content marketer. And most important of all, it's very hard to find and create good stories. It's very easy to come up with generic top 10 list blog posts that at this point people don't care about. It's very hard to find and create stories that people really care about and that actually build a relationship with them. So this is what we built Contently to do, is to help publishers and brands tell great stories. And part of our mission started with journalists themselves, with freelance journalists who were looking for work. We wanted to connect them to work that really cared about high quality. And that work comes in a lot of cases from brands these days. So we built out a suite of tools and a network of talent to help brands solve these challenges and become effective publishers. And we came up with a philosophy for how this ought to be done, how to succeed at a high level with content marketing. And it's really about creating stories, building relationships with those stories, and then measuring results. And so we have what we call the content flywheel, which is this diagram here of the 3 things that you need to do to be successful in content marketing. It's create, engage, and then optimize. The acronym CEO, if you want to make it easier. Now, underneath that, you need to be able to scale. So any individual blogger can create a blog post, can send it out to an audience and engage them, and can see what happened and then optimize the next time. But doing that at scale gets tricky. And so this is basically a checklist here of all of the different things that we found to be crucial elements for a business to be effective at content marketing. And we'll go through those in a minute. But then also, there's a lot of technology out there made for publishers to be successful on the internet, but there's very little technology built specifically for brands. So if you're a website like the New York Times, you care about selling advertisements, and you sell advertisements based on how many people view the advertisement. So page views are the most important thing to you because that's what makes you money. So everything that you measure, everything that you optimize is geared towards looking at page views and getting more of them. The problem for brands is page views don't drive necessarily sales. They don't drive necessarily branding. If you have content on your own website, great, you hopefully should be building a relationship with people, but page views are a poor proxy for whether a relationship is being built. A better proxy is how much time have you spent engaged or engaging with the content itself. Do you come back? Do you finish the story? Do you bail out very early? And what's the running timer of how many times you've come back? So what we advocate and what we build are tools to help brands measure over time the building of relationships with individual readers and with readers collectively. So there's a lot of metrics that you hear about in marketing, shares and page views, and usually those are the 2 main ones that we kind of rail on, that aren't correlated to whether people actually care. So a lot of people share without reading stories because they want to look good to their audiences, but they're not actually becoming more loyal to you as a company as a result. So we build technology to help you measure real engagement. Are people actually reading your content or viewing your content? Are they getting up to make a sandwich? Are they switching tabs? Are they coming back, and how long, and so on. And then we also believe that great stories are told by great storytellers. So we have a network of 40,000 journalists that are professionals from major brands, from the New York Times to Scientific American to Women's Health, and also video producers, photographers, and infographic artists. Because as a brand or as a company, you on the one hand don't necessarily have hired internal talent for publishing and storytelling, but you also don't necessarily want to take on the in-house risk of full-time employees for these tasks until you become good at publishing and you want to lean into what you're doing. And even then, the best media companies in the world and some of the best brand publishers still rely on freelancers for flexibility. They want people on the other side of the world to be able to feed them stories. And then we use our own methodology and our own tools and our own talent network to create a publication for content marketers that's grown to become the #1 publication for the enterprise. We get millions of readers, every year, hundreds of thousands every month, coming to learn from our publication, and this actually drives business. So we test all of our tools on ourselves. But if you're wanting to dig in more into content marketing, this publication is obviously free, and you can find it at contently.com/strategist. So, and then finally, before I move on from Contently to how to be successful as a content marketer, we also build free tools for journalists to help them build websites and manage their portfolios. And we also run a nonprofit for investigative journalism, since a lot of the work that we're facilitating is entertainment, information, it's brands providing value rather than being takers, but also American Express isn't going to fund the story about gun violence in New York City, and sometimes the New York Post doesn't have enough money to do that story, and so we put our profits towards that as a nonprofit. So getting back to, so that's why we're doing what we're doing and why we care about content marketing and how we've developed our expertise in content marketing. But getting back to how to be successful at it, really content marketing is about these 4 action steps. When you boil down all of the advice that you get, it's that stories engage people, they get people's attention, they get people to lean forward, and engaging people repeatedly with stories builds relationships, and relationships eventually lead to ROI. So if you think about your friendships, or you think about the people you have the deepest relationships with, a lot of that relationship building happens over telling stories. So you sit down with a new friend over coffee or at lunch, and what do? You tell stories. You get home at the end of the day, you sit with your family, and you reenact the comedies and the dramas that happen to you during your day. You tell stories. You get together with your friends, you laugh about the TV shows that you watch together, and you tell stories. That's how you build relationships. When you share more about your life or more about the things that you care about, those relationships become more meaningful and more solid. That's what you're doing as a brand when you tell stories. But you have to lead people through these steps. So you have to tell the stories, engage people with the stories, make sure that relationships are being built, and then from there you can correlate those relationships to some sort of ROI. So that gets us back to the flywheel. So the first section of the flywheel is about creating content. And there's several things that you need to do here. One is you need to source and manage talent. You need to decide, are you doing this internally? Is it your leadership team if you're a small company or a startup? Is it you yourself? Are you creating the content? Are you the talent? Or are you going to hire out with freelancers, or are you going to hire an agency to do it? In a lot of cases, we tend to be biased towards if you're a small company, doing it internally. If you're a mid-sized company or a huge company, then use an agency or use freelancers in a system like ours to source and manage talent. It's surprisingly hard to find good talent, and it's because you don't just need people who are good at telling stories, but you want people who understand the industry that you're talking about very deeply. So if you're selling cloud computing widgets, you want people that understand cloud computing widgets and the people who read about them, so that you're not just telling very surface level stories that no one cares about. Also, part of the talent equation is you want talent that have audiences of their own, so that you get the benefit of their distribution as well when you get to the engagement part. You need to put in systems for generating ideas. So we build tools for all of this, but all of this can be done, by hand if you're small. But generating ideas, you want ideas to be fed from both what's happening outside in your industry and the news that you care about, and turning those news stories and the happenings of your industry into commentary or perspective from you, or adding to that. In the next slide, I'll get to more of the idea generation. There's also ideas that come internally and just sort of brainstorming and all that. But then the planning and scheduling part is very crucial to content marketing, where it's sort of like, it's more like going to the gym than getting like a stim shot or something. It's muscle building. You're telling stories over and over and over again. You're building relationships with people, not just in one shot. You're not going for the viral hit that then goes away. Content marketing can get you this nice snowball effect where there's this slow build that eventually is a fast build that gets bigger and bigger. But to do that, you need to be consistent, and you need to be rigorous about your planning and scheduling what you're publishing and when you're publishing. You need to have systems in place for how you're going to create the content in the first place. Who's creating what assets, who's doing the writing, who's doing the photo, who's doing the editing, who's doing the revisions. And then if you're a bigger organization, you need to have a chain of command for who needs to see and approve content before it goes out. Who are the organizational sign-offs that need to happen in general for aspects of content. And then there's things like compliance. If you happen to be in a gigantic company in the insurance industry or something, you need to have people involved and tracking involved to make sure that happens. Fortunately for most startups and small and mid-sized businesses, that's not as big a deal. But so in the creation process, we like to talk about this framework here, what we call the funnel matrix. It's a combination of different diagrams about the kinds of stories that you can be telling and how you can ideate for those stories. How do you come up with ideas? So basically, we take a traditional marketing funnel from the top to the bottom and divide it into 3 sections based on how far your relationship with a customer has progressed or a reader has progressed. At the top is stories about shared values. This is where Whole Foods talks about family and sustainability. They just want to connect with people, tell stories, get them to make contact and engage with them. But then once you've engaged and maybe subscribed, or you're more interested in the brand because of that relationship that's budding, you can start to tell stories about your company and your customers. So this is, when General Electric tells the stories about the jet engines that it's building, or actually not even that. It's telling the stories about the successful train engineer that is using the new electric GE whatever. These are where case study, story-based case studies are really effective. How your customers have been successful through stories, not through sort of generic problem solution. This is stories about your company's history. Where have you come from? Why are you doing what you're doing? And then finally, at the bottom of the funnel are sort of where you get more to normally like the brochure section, right? What does the product do? Why does it matter to me? But wrapping that into stories. So one of my favorite examples is this company called Zady, ZADY.com, that is a sustainable clothing company. When you get to the product pages, you get to the page on indigo skinny jeans. What you see is, yes, here's the price, here's the size and all that, but then also here's the story of the cute couple in Kentucky that makes these jeans in their garage. Here's the pictures of them, the story of how they met, here's a picture of their dog, and here's why they love doing what they do. And so that's a better way to tell your product story than just simply throwing your product out there, because the next time I'm in the market for indigo skinny jeans, I'm going to remember Zady because of that. I'm going to remember those guys because of that story, because of Kentucky and the dog and the couple and all that. So that's how you should think about the kinds of content, the kinds of stories that you want to be producing. You want to progress people closer to your product. But then also, for brainstorming purposes, the more constraints you can put on this, the easier it is to come up with individual story ideas. So we like to divide this matrix into 3 tracks: timely stories, seasonal stories, and evergreen stories. So timely basically is stuff that's happening right now that you can talk about. Something in the news that connects with your shared values, write a story about it, comment on it. Stuff that's in the news that connects to what you're doing. So you launch a new factory or whatever, rather than a press release, tell it as a story. Stories about your products, you launched a product, tell the story behind the product. Like, how did you make it? Why did you make it? Rather than just here it is. Seasonal is basically stuff that's timely but that you can plan for. So football season or fall or summer or conference that's coming up. So these are stories that you can get ready to launch when the time is right. And then evergreen stories are what you do when there's nothing going on. These are the stories that people can come back to time and again. A lot of the times they're human interest stories, they're educational stories, how-to, that sort of thing. When you get down to stories about your products, the evergreen stories are the stories of how the product is used to do creative things, or how it's been used effectively to achieve great results, that sort of thing. So the second part of the content flywheel is, once you're creating content, you're coming up with these story ideas, you're getting them out there. Well, you need to get them out there. You need to engage your audience. And so the first is to publish your content to somewhere, to your content management system. This might be, if you're doing longer form, something like a WordPress. It might be, a system that manages your social media, so like a Sprinkler or a Percolate. If you're pushing content out somewhere, but then you need to sort of spray it around the social media ecosystem, tools like that. So basically, your content needs to live somewhere. One of the best places I found recently for businesses, especially B2B, but business content, is LinkedIn as a content management system. So you can publish your posts and your stories on LinkedIn and engage the audience there. So once the content's out there, you need to drive traffic to it. And so these are very high level, and in our magazine, The Content Strategist, we get into much more detail, and happy to share that stuff with you. But at a high level, there's a few strategies for getting people to come to your content. You can pay to distribute your headlines, essentially advertisements for your content. So if you've ever been to a website, you read down to the bottom, it says more stories like this. You can pay to put your story there. So you can have your story about cars at the bottom of the car magazine, and people click on that and they come to your site, and hopefully they engage, and hopefully they start to build a relationship with you. There's paid distribution. This is also where you get Twitter ads and Facebook sponsored updates, ways to pay money to get your message in front of people. There's the free way of doing that, which is social amplification. So designing wherever it is that you're publishing to be very easy for people to share it, but then also reaching out to people who would be interested in the content and getting them to share it, building your own social list. You can pay to build your social media following as promoted accounts on Twitter and Facebook, and I don't know on Pinterest yet, but kind of that's the standard on social networks. You can build your following. You can use that following to amplify and engage people. Then the other track is to share the content that you have throughout your organization. So often there's a marketing team that's in charge of making content. They spit it out on the internet and they hope people come, or they do social and they do paid, but they don't empower the rest of their company with that content to spread it as well. The most common example of this working well is when you have a sales team. Having your marketing team, your content team, give the sales team great content, let them know when you're publishing what, and feed them content that will help them with their prospects. That opens up doors in a very powerful way. Even at Contently, our sales team has noticed that when people don't respond to their emails, asking if they want to have a sales call, they will respond to emails saying, "Hey, I thought you might like this piece of content." And that is a conversation starter. Then the most important thing, I think, or the most underrated thing with engagement is subscriber collection and email marketing. So anytime you publish anything, you should give people a means to get more content from you, rather than just hope that they randomly find you again in social, or they randomly click on one of your things. You want to collect subscribers, and one of the easiest ways to do this is to develop some content that is more sort of premium, and for the price of an email address, for the price of signing up, following on Twitter, give them that piece of content. So like an ebook or a in-depth guide or a really in-depth story, and we do this on a lot of our properties, where at the bottom of the story that you read, it says, do you want the definitive guide to whatever? Give us your email address and you'll get that, and you'll also get our weekly or daily content. Or just simply asking people, do you want more of this? Subscribe via email. We found that email is the biggest and most predictable driver of engagement, of time spent, of any category with us and our customers. Social media tends to be the biggest driver of traffic, but slightly less engaged traffic than people who have subscribed over email. So the third is the optimized part of the equation, which is, so you're creating content, you're getting it out there, you're getting people to pay attention to it. Now you want to make it better. How can you learn from what you're doing so that you can do it more effectively? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to measure that engagement. And you can measure everything, right? You should measure your page views and your shares almost as a vanity thing. But the thing that you really need to focus on is measuring how much time people are spending, when they drop off, is the content actually getting to them, or are they jumping away? And so there are various tools that you can use to do this, but you should measure engagement on a macro scale. So how much time are we getting from our audience in general, every month or every week. But you should also measure it on a micro scale. This story got this amount of engagement over this period of time, so that you can start to eventually do a regression analysis where you say, these are the stories with these factors that generally result in the most engagement. How can we do more and better stories like this? You can use technology to do this automatically. This is some of the stuff that we build. But again, you can also, especially if you're a small operation or just getting started, you can do this on your own by just an analysis. And then from engagement, you want to start to measure relationships. This is really, your subscribers. How many people are following you? How many people are subscribing to your email list? And to some extent, it's the repeat visits. It's the people who have engaged, for several minutes, but have come back to engage for several more minutes and have come back a third time to engage even more. And then you want to measure for the two main things that happen as a result of content marketing. Either your brand being lifted or conversions that lead to sales. And this is the ROI part. So brand lift is really, it's kind of the billboard thing. It's the Nielsen marketing science for, do people like our brand more? Or do they think the right thing about our brand? Or what's the question that we want to change because of engaging with our content or seeing our advertisement or seeing our TV commercial? So you can measure brand lift through a variety of ways. You can use tools to do it that survey people essentially. You can commission a brand lift study. Usually this is only effective if you have a very big platform. You're high volume, you're a big consumer brand. In a lot of cases, small businesses are looking for conversions of some sort that they can then tie to revenue. So a conversion might be a sale, a conversion might be a subscribe, that that people who subscribe will eventually turn into a sale, so you can back out a dollar figure on that and do some math. A conversion might be a demo, or it might be getting someone to a conference. Whatever that is, you want to draw a thread between the conversion rate from engagement to relationships and the conversion rate from relationships to conversions. And so when you do that, you start to paint a picture of how this content is moving your business. And as, again, to the muscle building analogy, as the muscles get bigger, as the snowball rolls faster, you'll see that the flywheel gets faster too. And the final thing that you want to do is you want to take that conversion and brand lift and the ROI and feed that back to your content creation team with actionable insights. So you want to tell your team, these are the things that are factoring into the content that's working for our business. So we write about all of this stuff in much more detail and with lots of case studies at contently.com/strategist. We do several stories a day, so we're eating our own dog food. We're teaching about content marketing, using our own tools on content marketing. But all the content here is free, and you're welcome to dig in more there. But the message at the end of the day with content marketing is that teaching people is more effective than spending money to get in front of them. That giving value is better at building real relationships than interrupting people and asking. Giving is better than asking. Teaching is better than spending. And that is the pitch. So we have a few questions on the side here that I'm going to go through. The first one is, can small businesses create and share stories that people will care about? Should they? And when should they start? When the social following gets big or right out the gates? So small businesses can create and share stories that people care about, and they should. So it depends on your goal. I think with anything, you shouldn't jump into some marketing activity without understanding what you want to get from it. The thing about small businesses and startups is you're fighting an uphill battle. You're small, and often you're fighting against incumbents, bigger companies, or you're paving new ground. You have very few resources to do this as a small business. The one thing that you can do in an outsized way is build your brand, and you can do that through telling stories. So there are tons of examples of small companies that have built very big audiences and therefore built big businesses through content. Some of my favorite ones that are well known are Birchbox, the beauty subscription site, or BarkBox, actually, using their same model, the dog product subscription site. Mint.com was one that did very well by sharing financial news and information and used that to build a very big business. So there's lots of precedents for small businesses doing this. The question when the social following gets big or right out of the gates, I mean, content will build your social following, and you definitely don't want to start too big because you don't want to spend your money, unwisely, but you don't want to do bad content. I would say quality content, building up a backlog of really high quality content, even if few people are paying attention to it, is good because that consistency, that quality will be rewarded later when you do build audience, because you can take that content and repackage it and resend it to your audience, or people will discover that content once they do start coming. So for us, even for our site, our social following has actually followed in terms of numbers the growth of our publication, our traffic. So we get traffic because people share, but we get subscribers because we get traffic, if that makes sense. So the two definitely dovetail into each other. Second question, what if you work for a boring company? Suggestions for creating great stories. I mean, we work with really boring companies, and we work with Fortune 500 brands, a lot of which are in staid industries and aren't necessarily inherently interesting. There's two things there, though, is that to boring companies, to their customers, the stuff that they're doing is interesting. It depends. If you're B2B and you're a boring company, there's a small slice of the world that actually is very geeky about whatever it is that you do. In our case, it's the marketing technology world. There are people who are very geeky about marketing technology, even though I can't go home to my family for Thanksgiving and talk about content marketing technology. Everyone will be bored out of their mind. So there's that to be said, but there's also the thing to be said that good stories can be interesting no matter what, and no matter what industry. The starting point, I would say, for more sort of buttoned up industries is tell stories about things that you value. Go for that top of the funnel, the shared value stories. So this is why you see insurance companies talking about football, because they care about protection, and football, has a clear tie to that. So that's where I would start with telling stories if you're a boring company. And the suggestions for creating those great stories, use that funnel matrix, divide up the shared values and the stories about your company and your history and your customers. Your company history is probably interesting. There's got to be interesting people inside your company that you can tell stories about, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the boring excuse is an excuse, but we all have struggled with it and have all gotten through it. And I think it's about finding ways to tie a thread somehow to interesting stories, even if they're not on the nose, which actually is probably the biggest mistake people make, is they try and be too on the nose, and then they don't engage people or build those relationships. You can be more on the nose once the relationship is built. What quality should I look for in a person if I need to hire an awesome content creator? You want someone who can find stories as much as they can tell stories. So someone who has the reporting chops and the ability to make phone calls and dig in and do research and get into places that you normally don't get into. It's really that reporter's skill set. So I mean, a lot of marketers and a lot of marketing companies are hiring journalists now because they have that reporter's skill set. You obviously want someone who can write well or record well or edit well, depending on the medium. And then you're looking for those two other things. Do they have an audience? The bigger the following, the better you can judge that they are at engaging audiences, but also then they'll spread your content for you. And then there's the subject matter fit. There's great journalists can be generalists, right? A great journalist can learn a topic and interview the right people, and that's great. What you want is someone who can become obsessed with your industry to the point that they are the go-to in the world for whatever it is that you're talking about. And so if you're in the beauty industry, you may not want to get the tech writer, or if you're in the tech industry, you may not want to get the gardening writer. You may not even want to get the business writer, but you might, and you might get them to jump in and to train. But there are people out there in every industry with every expertise, and if you can get that subject matter match, then that's really valuable and really crucial. you talked about the different type of stories we can create, but how often should we publish a big story? Do we supplement the smaller stories in between a big story? This is all about the strategy of what you're trying to accomplish, right? Are you trying to do the perception shift? Are you trying for branding? Are you trying to get media to talk about your content? Some companies only do big stories and they become known for that. And some companies only do small stories and they become known for that. And some do a mix. It's probably a good testing strategy, I guess, experimental strategy to try different kinds of stories. I mean, use the flywheel, right? Tell different kinds of stories, see the engagement that they get, and then use that feedback to do more of what works. OkCupid, for example, does one big story every, month or not even that often. And every time that story hits, everyone reads it, and the press writes about it, and it becomes this event almost. They've decided that that's the most effective thing for them, more effective than them doing a small story every day, or even doing a small story every day and then a big story every month. And on the other hand, some companies do well with, so Groupon, for example, they did well with one story a day, in each email in each market, and it was very small. You see, Birchbox is another example that I gave. They do a lot of stories that are smallish and sort of quick hits, and they do some bigger ones for their magazine as well. That's the strategy we take. We've found that for our customers, for the stories about shared values, the big stories are very effective, and kind of the big stories and sort of the fun social media like stories do very well at getting engagement. For the stories about our company and our customers and kind of the news, it's usually kind of that in between. A 1,000-word post is better than a 500-word post we found. And then for the stories about our products, we tend to go longer. That the stories about the new feature that we release or how something has worked. The more story we have, the more time people spend, because people are thinking of investing in our product. They want as much information as they can. So it's really about the different goals that you have. I am a big fan of big stories, of long, lean-forward experiences, because you're seeing that it's only a myth that people don't consume long-form content on mobile devices, and in this sort of ADD era of the internet, people actually do consume that content, and at great rates. I was just with a reporter from Business Insider who was talking about how the slideshows that they do, which are very sort of quick hit kind of content, do very well, but the 10,000 word pieces that take you half an hour to read do just as well, and they get people actually to engage much, much longer. And that's on the same website and on the same internet with people reading on their tiny, tiny screens. So it's really about your audience and the cadence that works and the format that works, and that's why the process should be more like a flywheel, less like a build up to something big and then hope it works, but getting feedback and optimizing what you're creating, how you're engaging it with people, and then how you're measuring it. So I think that's all the questions. Derek, are we good?
Yeah, we're good. We're good to go. We're super thankful for Shane today for sharing his knowledge on the topic of content creation and content marketing and creating and dispersing big, valuable company and brand stories. Before we hang up here, Shane, do you want to kind of give us an idea of your new book out, why you wrote it, why we should read it, why it would be useful for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. So the book is called Smartcuts. It's about how hackers, innovators, and icons accelerate success. It's a look at people and businesses throughout history that did incredible things faster than people thought they could. And it's a tour of a variety of industries, from hospitals to race car drivers to tech companies to space companies, and a variety of historical settings, from the Cuban Revolution to bad U.S. presidents and so on. And basically it looks at the patterns of how these companies were able to work smarter and to find smarter paths than their peers. And actually, a good part of the book deals with marketing and storytelling, and how marketing and storytelling can be a very effective way to beat the norm and beat the average. And so the book I really wrote because I wanted people and businesses that felt like they'd hit a plateau and weren't sure how to get to the next level. I wanted to show them, not only through stories of how others had done it, but the patterns and the research that kind of dispels the myths that we have about success so that we can take things to the next level. And it's been really well received so far. I mean, the reviews are fantastic. It was #1 on Amazon for a while, and it's doing really well, and lots of flattering comparisons to some of Malcolm Gladwell's work and the Freakonomics guy's work, but as applied to growing businesses. So definitely check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to finish that book up. My brain is spinning right now with all of the stuff that you mentioned today with creating stories. I'm excited to put some of these action plans into storytelling for Stukent. So just a reminder, we are giving away one of these books, Smartcuts. And to get to the show notes page of this expert session, we'll provide a link in the video if you're viewing this on YouTube. And tell us what you learned, how you're going to apply this in your future endeavors or in your current role with your current company. And before we hang up, Shane, is there a place where we can go to follow you or learn more about what you're doing and the successes along the way?
Sure. I mean, everything is at my website, shanesnow.com. You can find all my social stuff in the book and Contently from there.
Cool. All right. Well, once again, thanks, Shane.
My pleasure.
For your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.